Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, How to Grade Your Company's IT. We've been doing a series now for a few months now, trying to have an educational influence in the community and share some of our knowledge, and this is the next step on the path. And I think a cool topic this morning, or this afternoon rather, to look at that a lot of companies just aren't talking about or not talking about enough. And so we really, part of these presentations is to stimulate some conversations, to stimulate some discussion, either with your IT service provider, with us as a potential provider, or with in-house staff. So let's get started. Just a real quick introduction, my name is Michael Pickering. I am the president and co-founder of Tech42, and I've been doing this for a little over 25 years. And I've had the really cool opportunity to have a dual background, both in network engineering and software development, and moved kind of back and forth between either sides of the house, which has given me a really broad perspective on technology and how it gets used in the workplace and how people think about technology, which kind of feeds into, I'm really passionate about the human and technology interaction. My belief is, computers, technology are really meant to make our lives easier, simpler, more efficient, more effective. And I love just understanding, what works well, and what helps make technology work for people. So let's just start to talk for a few minutes about why an IT scorecard. Why would we put this out there? Why would we do this? And there's a few reasons that we came up with it. One is so often we run into the scenario where people just don't understand what good looks like. What does good security and network look like? What does a good backup look like? What does good stability and scalability look in a network? Often people are like, hey, I got my email this morning and I was able to sign on. We're doing good, right? And there's just so much vulnerability and so many doors left open that really need to be looked at. So we want to, kind of start to have a baseline for what does a good network look like. And as I said, kind of coming into this, we want it to be a conversation starter on multiple levels. This may be an owner looking at this and saying, hey, I got to start a conversation with my IT people to understand, are we pursuing a good network? Are we moving forward? Or are we just maintaining a status quo? And maybe there's conversations that I don't even understand necessarily how to have. And let's be honest, we all know how to answer questions so that conversation gets shut down, right? So that more deeper probing questions don't get answered. So that's part of the problem. Then there's also the problem where, questions get asked and there's a differentiation in expectation, right? You ask, your IT staff maybe, hey, are we backing up our data? And the IT staff gives you a big thumbs up and says, absolutely, we're back up our data every night. And your expectation, my expectation as an owner will be that is some sort of automated process that's documented, that's getting reviewed to make sure the data is truly getting backed up, it's getting offsite, and when we really need it, it's there. But the reality is that IT person is doing 3 different processes. 2 of them are manual. There's no real reporting going on. There's no real testing going on. One of them, they're actually carrying a piece of hardware off-site at night, either in a bag or purse or something. And if they're out on vacation or sick, well, sometimes we do miss a backup on a day, and there's just not consistency there. And so much of the knowledge is in their head. So if we had to bring someone else in, God forbid something happened to that IT person, they get hit by the proverbial bus or they catch COVID or whatever. We're in a really bad spot. So we want to start driving some conversations. Or it may be the other way around. It may be you're the IT entity in the organization and you're just frustrated and you say, I know my technology could be better, needs to be better, ought to be better. How do I start a conversation with the ownership, with the leadership in the company to say, hey, we're not where we ought to be, and we need to, kind of go in this direction. You guys kind of need to understand I'm doing my best over here, but I need some support. I need budget maybe, or I need tools to do the job. So we want to start some conversation. And you know what? The stakes are really higher than ever, and they continue to rise. The danger for a small business, medium-sized businesses not taking these conversations seriously, it is only getting more and more dangerous by the month with a lot of just the emerging cyber attacks we're seeing, the way attacks are being performed, and also the fact that last year, a high percentage of the attacks that were documented, cyber attacks that were documented, were specifically targeted at small business. So those stakes are rising. We've got to be having these conversations. We've got to be moving our IT forward. And then for accountability, are we all doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing as an IT person? Is my IT person doing the right thing as an owner? we want to make sure that we have some standard of accountability. It's not just something that we're ignoring until it breaks, until we can't get in, until we can't get email. So those are some of the whys for us this morning, why we would put together an IT scorecard. And then what we're going to do now is just kind of move through some of the questions. We've posted this up on our social media and our website. You can grab this scorecard and do it at any time yourself. But we really wanted to use it to start to drive some conversation. So I'm going to talk you through some of the questions that we put on this scorecard and why they're important for you to ask and what the answer should look like. So for our first screen here, the first section, we want to look at backup, and backup is just obviously so important. As a ransomware prevention, crypto mining prevention, but also for, to protect you from site failure, from hardware failure, from employee failure, sabotage. There's so many things that backup protects us against that we need to take it seriously. So some of the questions that we want you to be asking are, have you reviewed what is being backed up? It's not just good enough to have a backup set up and know that it runs every night, but are we backing up the right data, right? Have we looked at it recently and made sure that, hey, Susie over in accounting, she needed a new folder. She put it over in this other area of the server. And you know what? We're not backing that up, right? We were never backing that folder up before. If you're not reviewing what is being backed up, you could be missing chunks of data. And then this kind of flowing out of that is have your key stakeholders review the backup. So have the important people that have data, the accounting department, right? The marketing department, all the CEO, all the different areas. Is their data, the data that's important to them, is it being backed up? So many times we see, C-level executives, CEOs, presidents that, kind of do their own little thing. They have data on their own laptop or whatever. It's kind of sensitive data. And it's not being put on a server, it's not getting backed up. And they don't know because they haven't asked the question, they haven't had the conversation. So you need to review backup with key stakeholders. Where's your data at? And is it in the backup? Do we retain backups long enough, right? How long do you need to keep the data? What's the window? So normally 90 days has kind of been a rule of thumb in our industry, but there are some industries that have compliance considerations, legal, healthcare, different ones that you actually are required by law to maintain your data for longer periods of time. Do we keep our data long enough? And do we, how quickly, do we know how quickly we can restore data? So yeah, it's great. We've got all the data backed up. It's safe, it's secure. We're covering all of our bases. But how quickly can we get that data back into play if there's an event? Is it hours? Is it days? Is it maybe even weeks? And often that is the answer, is that it could be even up to a week, right? And that's something that maybe the IT department made a decision, said, hey, it fits our budget, it's a really good solution. But they didn't really discuss it with leadership, right? Leadership just said, hey, we want backup. Make sure our data is getting backed up. But they never really thought about time to recover and how is it going to impact the business and how long is that going to take? Very important to understand how quickly can we restore the data. Also, if you know how quickly you can restore the data, it means you've tested it, right? You've actually ran a restoration test, which is also super important. So those two things are bundled in that question there. Are we following the 3-2-1 rule? So if you're outside the IT industry, you're gonna be like, what is the 3-2-1 rule? But the 3-2-1 rule is pretty simple, that you should have 3 copies of your data at all times, right? The master copy and then 2 backups. And then the 2 is that you should have it on 2 different mediums, right? You shouldn't have all 3 copies on the same disk drive, on the same server. So it's not just good enough to copy it from point A to point B, but we want to have it at least in 2 different places and 2 different mediums. One of those, very popular now, is to have it in the cloud, to have some sort of offsite cloud storage where it's stored in addition to an on-site backup methodology. And then the one is offsite. So three different copies, 2 different methodologies, and 1, do you have at least 1 copy offsite? So if you lost the building, something happened to your infrastructure, that you have that remote copy. And then this last one, this is kind of something that's become really important probably in the last 12 to 18 months where we're talking about it a lot more, and we're using this term air gapped, but is our backup air gapped? And the reason this is important and what this is we've seen recently where a lot of the malware, ransomware, crypto type attacks have gotten smart enough to not just crypto, right, encrypt our primary data, but also to go seeking our backup data and to crypto that and encrypt it so that we can't even roll our backups back after we've been hit by ransomware. We're still stuck paying that. So we've this concept now is to have an air gap where it's separate credentials for the storage or the backup that's limited to a backup software, and it possibly, even in the best cases, the system and the methodology where it's being stored is a different operating system with a different type of storage. So there's some true separation between your primary network and credentialing and wherever you're storing your backup locally in your facility. And so that's become really important. So is our backup air gap? So obviously, all of these questions, the right answer, the best answer is yes. And that's going to be the kind of the case as we go through all of these cards. If any of these come a no, you have to write a no on there. That's something that you should be really looking at. You should be taking consideration. And we're going to tell you kind of how to score this later on. But real, to come up with some results. But real simple, you get 1 point for every why you have. You get 0 points for no's, right? So add those up as you're going. All right, so that was backup. We want to talk about disaster and incident response. All right, we talked about backup and having our data protected, but do you have a plan for if something happens? How do we respond in the moment, right? And this may be very different between how IT thinks we ought to respond to something and how the ownership thinks we ought to respond to them. What are the priorities for the organization? Who's the most important? How do we handle things? And so my question is do you have a written plan for the following things? Do you have a written plan for theft, either of your data through hacking or ransomware, right? Or even through physical theft. Somebody just walks out of the building with something. Can happen. Now, something to point out, we're also going to talk about, do you have a plan for ransomware or crypto attack? And that's, might not just be a technology plan. That might also be a strategy, an action plan. How do we communicate this to our clients? How do we communicate this to our vendors? Are we required by law to report this in some situations? If you are a healthcare organization, you're covered by HIPAA, you are absolutely required by law. If you do not report this, the fines can be exceptional for this, even including jail time. It's very important, all right? But also something to be aware of with ransomware that we're seeing now is ransomware, they're double blackmailing the clients, right? So what does that mean? So ransomware is a form of virus that comes in and encrypts all your files and drops a note in the folder and says, hey, user, you want your data back? Great. We'd love to give it back to you. Here's the address you need to go to or the phone number you need to call to make a payment, typically in Bitcoin, right? And it could be thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever price tag they feel like they need to put on it, whatever they can extort you for. Pay us for it, and we'll give you the code to decrypt it. Now, they've done that for a while now. That's kind of been cool, but they got smart and they realized they could double dip on this. So now what they're doing is, in addition to that, they're also exporting your data, exfiltrating it out of your site to a remote storage space. And then what they do is they come back afterwards and say, hey, all right, you've got your data back, but now if you want us to not post it out on our website and give everybody, the whole world, access to all your data, right? All of your critical HR documents, your financial information, your sales strategies, your marketing strategies, whatever is your most personal, intimate data, do you not want it published out on a website? Pay us a second ransom, right? That's terrifying to me. That's very, very scary, but this is what we're seeing right now. You have to have a plan for that. How do we, if that happens and all of our data goes public, how do we respond to the media? Who responds to the media? All things that you need to have written plans for. How do we handle? Because in the moment, it's probably too late to try to come up with a plan. Sabotage, something that probably a lot of you don't think about in your businesses very often, but I can't tell you how many times we have either had an employee that was disgruntled that left and deleted all of their email, all of their files, whatever they could get access to before they walked out the door and they thought they could get away with, or people coming into the office, or people getting fired and getting access to things, all different types of forms of data sabotage that happens. How do we handle this, right? What are the legal ramifications? New to us, pandemic, work from home. Nobody had a plan for this. Let me tell you, we just spent 2 months and we're still dealing with it, making sure everybody is safe and working from home. Nobody had a plan for it. Guess what? We're starting to write plans for it now. Something you need to make sure you have a plan for. It may not be the last time we have to go and make this sudden transition to work from home. We need to be ready for it. Natural disaster, kind of something we've always had on there. What do you do in case of a flood, fire? Here in northeastern Pennsylvania, we have mine subsidence. Sometimes we lose buildings in the holes in the ground. Things are quite that bad, but you got to have plans for how do we continue to operate our IT in the face of one of these. And then I had already kind of mentioned it, but just worth mentioning again, media response. How do we respond if a reporter shows up at our client? How do we respond? What do our staff know what to do, what to say and what not to say? All things that we should have plans for. And if not, we should be having conversations around them because they can happen to us. Security. Man, if we didn't talk about anything other than security today, we probably would have been well served. A list of things I'm going to kind of blast through here, kind of some usual suspects, maybe some new ones on here. Do we have centrally monitored antivirus software with a current subscription? So many times I walk into companies, they say, we ask, hey, you guys got antivirus? What do you use? Yeah, I think we use, and they'll give me a product name. And I'll say, when was the last time you paid for your subscription or you renewed it? And they'll just scratch their head and say, oh, we'll have to pull the bill, right? If you're not paying for a subscription probably on a monthly basis, you're probably in trouble because antivirus works off of constantly updating signature files to understand new and emerging threats. Super important. And then somebody's got to be paying attention to it. If nobody's looking at it, monitoring it on a daily basis, it's almost useless as well. And then the new one that we're seeing is MDR and EDR solutions. These are kind of two different veins in the same breed of software, but it's a managed detection and response system. Basically, it's the concept of monitoring systems for unusual activity, because what we're seeing now is these hackers are getting much more sophisticated. They're not just infecting machines and walking away. They're finding ways to access your systems to get on the inside of the network and then sit and watch. And we're seeing 60, 90, 120 days that these hackers are sitting on the inside with credentials, able to see your files, see your emails, see how you operate, and they're learning the whole time. And then when they have a really good understanding of how your network works, a really good understanding of your practices, your policies, your security, your backup, then they launch an attack, and they do it in such a strategic way that you are defenseless. And a lot of times we're seeing where they've disabled antivirus programs, they've altered backup profiles so that the backups aren't there for you. They've done stuff to ensure that when they launch their attack, you will not have a defense. So these solutions, these MDR, EDR solutions, are active hunting type tools that we can install on your servers and workstations that look for these behavioral patterns, that look for stuff that's not viral in nature, it's not malware in nature, but it's suspicious, and often it allows us to catch things in that 90 to 120 day window after somebody's gotten into a network, but before they cripple your system. Very important to have that. Have we done security awareness training? Have we educated our staff on how to be careful? So if an EDR, MDR solution is important to protect once they're in, security awareness is the human firewall, training your people to make sure they don't get in the first place. And if you're not doing security awareness on at least an annual or semi-annual basis, your staff probably is clueless to what they need to do. They don't know how to identify phishing attacks. They don't know how to identify spam. They don't know what to do if they do find it, who to talk to. There's so much that you should be doing wrapped around educating your staff to make sure they are helping prevent from these attacks happening in the first place. Some real simple ones that have been on the list forever and a day, but we still see people that aren't doing it, right? Password rotation policies, password complexity policies, password lockout strategies, right? And all three of those feed into keeping somebody who's gotten credentials out of the network, right? All right, our credentials have been compromised, but if we don't change their credentials, they have unlimited access forever and ever. At least if we're changing them, there's some complexity, there's lockouts, it slows them down, sometimes can protect you completely. Very simple things to do, don't really even cost you any money, just take a little bit of time to set up and enforce. Are we monitoring the dark web for credential leaks? One of the things we see all the time is that people are creatures of habit. I have to confess, in my youth, I did the same thing. We use the same passwords or simple derivations of the same password across everything we do. So our social media, Facebook, Instagram, right, LinkedIn, and then across our professional platforms, our Active Directory, right, our Windows login, our email logins, Office 365 logins, QuickBooks logins, all similar. So here's what happens. If a malicious entity cracks one of these public social media sites that aren't super well protected, right, they have credentials that they a lot of times can map back to one of your local users. We need to be monitoring the dark web where these credentials are bought and sold daily. We need to be monitoring out there to know, hey, has one of our employees' credentials been compromised? Do we need to take action? Do we need to do something? But if you're not watching, you'll never know. Not terribly expensive services, very affordable. Just something you have to be intentional about doing. And have we done a vulnerability risk assessment? Let me tell you, every organization has vulnerability and risk in their IT. Every organization, right? If you haven't done an assessment, the only difference between you and someone who has is you don't know where your risk is. You don't know where you're vulnerable, and you are not able to take action. If you've done an assessment, that probably means you're smart enough to say, hey, we've got to take some action about this. We got to start planning on this. And we might not be able to do it all at once, but at least we can start taking action and start knocking down the biggest risks and the biggest vulnerabilities, and we have an understanding. Super important. You should be doing this probably at least on an annual basis. Many companies I know, myself included, we have our CPA look at our financials on a yearly basis. Hey, how am I doing? Am I doing things right? Am I protected from a tax standpoint? You should be doing the same thing with your IT, right? We need to have an assessment, whether it's done by your internal organization, you hire an external organization, but there will be some kind of standardized assessment that we go through to identify risk and vulnerability. And then lastly, we're using MFA, multi-factor authentication. Passwords are not enough anymore. We need a secondary layer of protection. That's called multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and there's a number of systems out there doing this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking on it, but it's a question to ask, and if you're not doing it, this is certainly the time to start doing it. Documentation. One of the most boring, arduous things in all of technology. We all hate doing it, but it's probably also one of the most important, most useful, most profitable things to be done, and how efficient and standardized it can make an IT department or even an entire organization, quite frankly. So my first question on there is, do you have a searchable collection of documents, right? So sometimes we walk into organizations like, we got some spreadsheets, we got some Word documents, they're kind of here, and here, and they're not indexable, they're not searchable, and that means basically they're not usable. Guys, it's 2020, right? There is technology, web-based technology that's highly securable, highly scalable, where we can collect these documents, format these documents, publish these documents, control access to them, and then also make them searchable. We ought to be using this technology. It is not expensive at all. It just takes a little bit of intention to set it up, curate it, and continue to build it. But if you are not doing that as an organization, you are missing a big piece of the pie of who you should be right now. And just efficiency you can add to your organization, but technology needs it so desperately. And so a few of the things that we should have documented: backup and restore process. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of backup. You need to have a backup and restore process documented. Again, what happens if the key person, your IT person or persons, for some reason is unavailable when you have a critical event? What if they get COVID? What if they get hit by a bus? You need to have a process. Where's the data at? How do we get it back? Have it documented. Key accounts and passwords. I can't tell you how many times we've taken over new accounts. They fired a previous IT entity for whatever reason, wasn't doing their job. It had become adversarial in the relationship. And we start saying, hey, where's the account for this? Where's the account for this? Where's the password for this? And they're like, oh, so-and-so had it. Oh, so-and-so had it. And we spend hours, sometimes days, if not weeks, tracking stuff down, getting stuff reset, sometimes even reformatting, reloading operating systems because we just can't get around certain things. All key accounts and passwords ought to be documented. And I'll just also throw out there, one of my engineers was looking at this ahead of time. He said, make sure you tell them they need to have that encrypted, right? Don't store that in clear text. And he was so right. Very important. But there are easy systems that can be implemented to do this and scale this out for you. Do you have an acceptable use policy for your technology? Do you have in writing what your employees are and are not allowed to do with your company technology? This is very important. If you ever have some sort of legal issue, an HR issue, something you need to do, you have an employee misusing technology, if you don't have it in writing what they are and aren't allowed to do, your ability to prosecute that or enforce it is very limited. You ought to always have an acceptable use policy that has been reviewed with your staff and signed off on them, that they understand what they are and aren't supposed to do. And I'll tell you what, this can go a long ways too, is to preventing bad stuff happening. Just telling them, hey, you're not allowed to do that with company technology. You're not allowed to go to that type of website. You're not allowed to do this. And sometimes it may seem obvious, right? There are certain sites that are not safe for work, quote unquote. You shouldn't be going to them. But if you don't tell them, sometimes say, well, it's my break, you know, it wasn't hurting anything. You need to make sure you clearly communicate these things. And then lastly, under documentation, do you have a policy of documenting key systems and processes, right? Where is the data for our line of business software? Are there certain things that have to be done on a weekly and monthly basis? IT personnel are really good at putting their fingers in the proverbial cracks of the dam and keeping everything running and seeming like everything works great. But it's because they've memorized a pattern of systems that they have to do. I have to run this process when this happens and that process when this happens. And I know that if I reboot this server on Monday night during a full moon, nothing bad happens. And I jest a little bit, but it's really that bad, where they do have all these things that are all in their head that they have to do. But those are all things that we're all at their mercy of. And honestly, it's not even fair to them, because they can't truly take time off either if they don't have these things documented. But you know what, IT people, we, and I own this, unless we force ourselves or unless somebody forces us, we don't document things. But it is so important to the organization and the health of the organization to have them documented, and so that we can pass off these things at times. Get your stuff documented. So that, I'm going to kind of shift gears here. That was kind of all more technology focused. Now we're going to talk more about the administrative side of it, right? We're going to talk about the budget a little bit. And this is where, hey, if you're an IT person, you might have agreed with a lot of what we said. Some of it you might say, yeah, I'm doing that. Oh, man, I'm not so good at that. But all of you that are IT people are going to sing with this section. Administrative C-suite people, you're going to kind of like, do I really have to have this? The answer is yes. If you want good things to happen in your business from a technology standpoint, you've got to have an IT budget. If you don't have an IT budget, I will guarantee you, you are either overspending, unlikely but happens on occasion, or probably more appropriately, grossly underspending on your technology. And all the things that we just talked with that your IT person would love to do and love to make happen for you in terrific fashion, they are greatly constricted by the budget, and they probably don't know how to tell you that, because they're like kind of afraid to say, oh, yeah, I need more money, because it's like, well, hey, what do we pay you for? But, you know, there's significant things that an IT person just cannot do unless they have spending power to do it. You have to have an IT budget, an annual amount of money that you are dedicated to spending on IT. So then that leads us into a question. Is your budget appropriate for the size of your business? Are you spending enough? And then, so then the question is, and this is the $1 million question, is what is enough money? How do I know if I'm at the right spending level? And so I did a little bit of research for you guys, and, you know, just to make sure I was given accurate information, because I had a pretty good feeling on this, but I went out and did some research and looked at a few different websites. And if you're curious, you know, call me, we can talk about this and where I got the information. But CompTIA is a big player in the IT industry, and they're one of the ones I got a report from. But the numbers say that most small businesses that are best in class, right? Their IT, they're meeting all of the things that we've put on this list prior, all of the things that you should be doing. And by the way, these lists are not exhaustive. These are big items that are glaring that we often see aren't done in organizations. I could probably create you a list of 200 questions and still not cover everything you ought to be doing. I'm trying to hit the big things, the things that we see frequently that companies just are failing on, that are so important to get done, right? All right, so anyway, the companies that are doing the best in IT, they have really successful ITs that are not getting compromised, they're safe, secure, scalable, they're spending between 4 and 6% of their top line gross revenue on IT. 4 to 6%. That's a pretty good chunk. And some of you just gulped deep when I said there's, you know, it's 4 to 6%. You're going to say, no way can I ever spend 4 to 6%. I'm not making these numbers up. I'm not telling you you know, that it's right or wrong. I'm telling you, though, that if you're spending less than this, you're probably underspending on IT. Now, there's definitely some fluctuation in there. And personally, I'm not crazy about anytime someone tells me a percentage of gross revenue is what I should be spending on anything, whether it's sales, marketing, whatever. But there are metrics that kind of give us a benchmark and help us understand, right? And even to be fair, it all depends, because I also read that if you're in healthcare or banking where you have higher IT needs, you have to have things like encryption and a different level of compliance and auditing. It probably jumps up to 6 or 7%. But then on the other spectrum, end of the spectrum, if you have a large workforce that doesn't use a lot of technology, like a construction business, transportation business, where you have a lot of non-computer facing employees, it could drop pretty radically. And you might go down into like the 1 or 2% zone. So it's a benchmark to kind of help us figure it out. I'll tell you the numbers, though, that I like much better is more of a per technology using person price, right? So for every person who's a primary tech user, someone that's sitting at a computer between 6 and 8 hours a day, that's using their computer, that they have to have a computer to do their job. And we're talking mostly professional organizations here, right? We're talking insurance agencies, healthcare facilities, lawyers' offices, things of this nature. Sometimes, call centers for manufacturing, or the administrative centers, marketing departments, all these kind of things. Those are the people. So for those people that are primary computer users, I would say your annual budget should be between $250 to $300 per month per user, right? So if you've got 10 of those users, and $250 a month, right? That'd be $2,500 a month you should be spending, and then times that by 12, give you your annual spend of what you should be spending on technology for your company, what you should be budgeting. Now, that's not just a blanket number. That number needs to be broken down a little bit. So I even went in and did some research. How do you break that down? How should we be spending it? You don't just give it all to the IT guy and say, hey, here's a budget, go spend it. No, you have to target some of that money. So roughly between 35 to 40% of that money should be spent on people. You're going to need to spend that either on an in-house IT staff or on outsourced IT, but 35 to 45% of that number should be spent on people to make it happen. And then another 20 to 30% ought to be spent on hardware. You need to budget every year to refresh hardware, servers, workstations, switches. All of the gear in your facility ages out. It goes out of warranty. You need to have a budget to refresh and replace that to make sure you're maintaining a healthy, stable network. Software. Now, this one can vary greatly, and this can go anywhere from 20% to 40% of those numbers, and it really all depends on what kind of industry you're in, what your line of business software looks like, what your spend on that is. But that, kind of give you a ballpark. And then you probably ought to be spending about 5% of that budget on IT management tools. And this could be like antivirus, remote monitoring, an EDR, MDR solution like we mentioned before, all these types of tools that we need to really make this thing happen. They're kind of behind the scenes. Mostly only your IT staff or outsourced IT is going to see these, but they're very critical. You've got to have budget money for them to have happen. And then security. 16 to 20% of that budget, bare minimum, ought to be focused on security services, monitoring, subscriptions, renewals, whatever. There's a whole suite of things you can do there. And then lastly, about 25 to 30% of that number should be spent on backup, monthly backup, because you're going to need to get that data off your facility, out of your property, into some sort of cloud. Remember, we said 3-2-1 rule 1. You need to have an offsite backup. You're going to spend roughly 20 or so % of that budget, could be a little higher, depending on how much data you have in your organization. All right, so that's is your budget appropriate size? So use those metrics, take a look at it and say, hey, have we budgeted well? Here's the thing, though. If you've got a budget and you say, man, I'm spending way less than that, I'm doing great, you're probably missing something. Almost without a shadow of a doubt, I can tell you, if you are underspending on IT, it's not that you're super efficient. It's that there's something you're not spending money on that's leaving a risk and a vulnerability in your organization that you need to seriously take a look at. And then lastly, I kind of just spoke to this, but does your budget account for all areas of technology, people, hardware, software, tools, security backup, and then training as well, something that we ought to be putting some money in. If you're not putting money into training your IT people, I can tell you they are slowly getting less and less able to do their job. Technology changes, it evolves. And even if there's not radical change in your organization, there's radical change in the industry that they need to be aware of if they're going to be able to deliver you new, modern, best-in-class solutions. You've got to get them some training. All right, so that's budgeting. And we got one more section we'll wrap up here, assessment. So all of this is great, but if you're not benchmarking it, if you're not looking at it, if you're not saying, hey, are we making progress? If you're not asking all the right questions to make sure it's happening, it's probably not happening at all. So my question is, do you have an assessment process? Internally in our organization, we have a red team and a blue team, right? Red team sets it up and builds it. Blue team comes in and says, hey, what about this? What about this with this? And challenges the red team. Says, hey, did you do your job right? And vice versa. But we go back and forth and challenge each other to make sure we're really doing all the right things for our clients. We're big enough to do that. We have a big enough IT staff. If you've got 2 people, you probably need to look at an outsourced provider or even if you have maybe a little bit bigger, but you want to make sure you're getting good answers out of your IT department, have somebody else take a look at it. Doesn't have to be terribly expensive, but it can be extremely valuable. And have you done an assessment in the last 12 months? Again, this is something you need to be doing at least annually. If you're not, you're missing stuff. Things are slipping, things are shifting, and you just don't know where you stand with risk and vulnerability. Did the plan, so if you did do it, did the plan identify weaknesses? If you answer no here, either you are uninformed or you're lying. Every time you do an assessment, you should be finding weaknesses. There is no such thing as a perfect network. Now, you may say that some of those weaknesses are things, you know what, we can accept that weakness right now because what it would cost to fix it is cost prohibitive, and the threat of the weakness is low. And that's okay as long as you understand it, you've identified it and discussed it, right? But if you do not know where the weaknesses are and you cannot clearly identify the weaknesses in your network, you are blind and vulnerable. So every time you have an assessment, there ought to be weaknesses identified. Was an action plan created and implemented? So what good is doing an assessment and what good is identifying weaknesses if you're not building a plan that says, hey, how do we remediate these? How do we triage these? How do we fix these? Or how do we just say it's good enough and we just kind of keep our finger on the pulse because it's not something we're going to close, but at least we have a plan wrapped around doing it. All of these are just so important, should have yeses there. And if they don't, please don't ignore this and take some action there. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. So how do I score this thing? Well, I told you, you give yourself a +1 for every yes, a 0 for every no. You can add those all up and put them in this column and then give yourself a final score. But basically, here's what you need to take away from it. If in any one of those categories, so backup, DIR, security, documentation, whatever, any one of those single categories, if you had either 0 or 1 yeses, you need to get new IT help immediately. Your current IT staff is not, and if you're an IT person that says, I'm sorry, but you're not doing your job. You are blind and not doing the job, and you guys are seriously at risk. You need to get some help and get it quick, right? 0 to 1. 2 to 3, if you get 2 to 3 yeses on there, hey, you're doing some stuff. You need to review. Maybe you need some IT help. Maybe you just need to renew your efforts. Maybe you need to get a budget in place so that you can actually do something, right? And I'll even give a little bit of grace to if there's 0 1 there. I say get new IT help. Maybe it's you need to get a budget to get some IT help. Maybe your IT person is wonderful. They just don't have the budget to do what they need to do, and they do need some outside help. And you need to give them a budget so they can get some resources. 2 to 3, review and take action. 3 or more, hey, you're doing okay, but keep reviewing, keep planning, don't give up. And man, hey, if you get all these, keep up the good work. Give me a call and let me know you got all of them. I'd love to write an article about how well you're doing IT. It's pretty rare we see that, but that's pretty cool if you're doing that. And pretty much the same thing, total score. If you had 0 to 10, get new IT help immediately. 11 to 20, review, take action soon. 20 to 30, refocus, right? You probably started off good at some point and you've kind of fallen off. You've gotten distracted. You've gotten busy. Certainly work from home, really bent a lot of us out of shape. But get back to your plan. Don't let it fall by the wayside. And hey, if you got 30 or more, you are rocking this. Well done to you. Gold star. C-suite people, administration people, if you got a 30+ network, give your IT person a raise. All right. So that is my presentation for today. Hopefully this opens some questions, stimulates some conversation internally. If not, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us at any time. We'd love to engage with you either on social media. You can email me, call me, whatever it is. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And hey, just let us know if you are doing good or if this report card has helped you, or if there's some way that we can assist you. I'm looking up right now. I don't think I have any questions out there in the audience right now. Kind of a light audience today. But hey, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch it today. And for those of you that catch it later on YouTube, we want to thank you as well. We appreciate you coming in and taking the time to watch our video. Best of luck to you, and have a great rest of your day.